Hey everybody, how's it going today? Thanks for joining me once again. Hi Rushback, thank you. One of my regulars, so glad to have you back here today, and welcome everybody else back, or if it's your first time, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to, kind of take a deep dive down my crazy mind. And it's going to be kind of a scary place. Maybe that's kind of Halloween themed or something. A little bit late. But we're going to talk a little bit today just about, where ideas come from and, how to get new ideas. Hi, Cassie. How are you doing? So, ideas are, they're kind of tough to do. They're tough to get. And I find that, a lot of people really struggle with their ideas. They really struggle with, how to get new ideas, where to get their ideas from, and kind of where to get started with their ideas. And, this is a really difficult, topic for some. And so I wanted to kind of, go down this path a little bit and try to help you, whether you're working on a new game idea or a story or just kind of, anything about where, ideas come from, and where you get them from. So Rushback, yes, we will talk about mind maps. And for those of you that don't know what a mind map is, it's kind of a chart of like where you get a central idea and you run a bunch of kind of ideas off of it. And so you'll start with kind of just one idea and it sort of draws lines out to other ideas. It's almost becomes like a flow chart of sorts. You can think of mind maps a little bit as like a flow chart. And mind mapping is a brainstorming tool, and it's definitely a way to gather your ideas. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with mind mapping. It is a tool. It is a technique, and I believe that the main software, I believe, is actually let me show an example here of what it would look like. There's no kind of right or wrong ways to do a mind map. Some of these are a little bit crazier than others. I would say that most mind maps are typically kind of more like this, where let me see if I can show this here. It kind of starts with a central idea, and then it just branches out into sort of other ideas. And then you can see that from like that one sets of ideas, you can try lots and lots of other stuff. And so it basically allows you to organize ideas and kind of spawn them off from each other. And so it's just a way of tracking ideas. And so as part of that, one of the important things about ideation, and if you don't know the word ideation, the concept is just creating ideas, right? So ideation is a fancy term for that. This is just, how do you get your ideas? How do you create your ideas? And how do you keep track of those ideas is kind of that first step, and whether you're old school and you write those ideas down in a notebook, whether you write them down in a Word document or a Google document is a set of bullet points, whether you use a mind mapping software to brainstorm, with yourself or with a team, it doesn't matter. What's the most important thing in the ideation process is that you don't lose ideas. And so, so my first advice before I kind of move on, because I realize in my really rough. And again, always please forgive my slide decks. I don't have a lot of time to prep for these weekly chats, and so again, I threw this together pretty quickly, so they're not all that great. So wish I could do a little bit better for you guys each week. But when you are brainstorming, it's important that you always capture all of your ideas, and so you want to make sure that the first point of this is that no idea is a bad idea right now. When you're brainstorming, when you're trying to get an idea, it's really important that to yourself, to be honest to yourself, but also especially in a team environment, that it's very clear that there's no bad ideas. And I think that's part of the ideation process, is that you need to be free to fully brainstorm, to fully come up with, like, just really getting ideas from random places. And sometimes the most random thing will lead to the best ideas, and sometimes you don't know. And eventually those ideas, I would say 90% of my ideas get thrown away. I do have lots of bad ideas myself, and stuff. But by capturing those ideas, there's also been times where, like, 6 months later, I might be working on the same game or a different game or something else, and like I'll be like struggling for an idea, and I'll remember like way back when I had an idea, and I'm like, oh, that was what solves my problem now, right? And so by kind of being methodical, meticulous with your idea capturings, whether you record them on video or audio, or just or meticulously write them down, however you want to organize this brainstorming process in ideation, the most important thing again is that you don't lose your ideas, right? So I think just keep that in mind, that when you are working on this process, that you need to really make sure that again, you don't lose any ideas, through this process from yourself or any others. And again, that people feel like that they're free to have any idea they want, and that they're free to give those ideas out without being criticized, and without, feeling like, oh, this might be a bad idea, so I better not say it, because then they're going to think I'm stupid or something, right? So you really need to make sure that the environment, if you're in a group setting, is. And so Rushback, yes, this is a little bit of a continuation of last week's talk, in that the process and kind of how we create. Like, so last week was kind of more the process, like how do we go through and get ideas, right? How do we go through and kind of, we're brainstorming the features for a game, and we know that we need to have X, Y, and Z features, but that doesn't necessarily. So that process will help in this process, right? Both of these are related. That's kind of why I decided to do this week's talk, is that there is some relevance to it. So if you guys have not seen last week's talk, I really highly do recommend watching last week's talk on systemic game design, because the systemic game design is about how to organize your ideas into systems, and that's helping on pure gameplay. Ideation is a little bit more on the creative side. Now, this does not mean that it's not related to gameplay or doesn't have relevance to gameplay, but and so these two can be very hand in hand, right? But keep in mind, these are kind of different topics. One's a little bit more creative, and the systemic stuff from last week was a little bit more on the process side, if that makes sense. So hopefully you'll kind of see how and where I'm going with both of these. And, people often ask me where my ideas come from. And, it's kind of funny, being a quote-unquote creative leader, for whatever that means, for a lot of my life. I've been making games now for almost 30 years, and I've worked on hundreds of games, and some really crazy games, some games that really were, kind of games that, a lot of people accuse me, like, you must have been on drugs to come up with that idea, literally. I can't even tell you how many times I've been accused of that. And it's hilarious because they think that the only way that creatives can come up with great ideas is to use substances or do something else that is mind altering, and that we're incapable of having our own ideas, right? Or being able to come up with highly creative ideas. And so that's absolutely not true. And, and there's a lot of places to use our imaginations, right? To use, the stuff, in our minds. And some of our stuff does, some of my best ideas have honestly come from my dreams. They've come from my nightmares even, and things like that. They've come from a real wide variety of places. And so I'll often, when I'm in the middle of a project, even sleep with a notebook by my bed. Because I can't even tell you how many times I've woken up at, 2 or 3 a.m. with an idea, that I just have to get out of my head in order to get that, idea out there. Because I literally can't sleep until I'm able to get that idea out of my head, right? And so that process, that ideation process, sometimes consumes us. And that's part of being a great creative, is that when our brains, especially my stupid brain, when I start thinking of ideas, I sometimes can't shut that off. And it's a blessing and it's a curse, right? And so you need to learn to embrace that and get ideas out and learn where those ideas, are useful to you. And also how to stop to stay focused. And that's the other problem. But sometimes we chase our ideas so much, and we don't know what's the right path, right? And so we just keep kind of going out all over the place, and our ideas are shooting out in 1,000 ways. And there's a time and a place for that, right? There's a time and a place for randomization, and there's a time and a place to focus. And so a really great game designer is going to know when to focus and where to focus and what to focus on. And so this comes back a little bit to last week's talk of systemic game design, and sort of knowing, again, in the end, a lot of things need to be designed, but knowing when to design them and what to focus on and how much to focus on it is really what makes or breaks, I think, a really great game designer. And so that's something that's really important to understand. So, hi Nocdemus, nice to have you here. And Bunny Hatcher says, hi Troy, thanks for the talk. I have one question regarding managing ideas. I write down ideas a lot, but I have the problem that afterwards I have spread out different and not necessarily related ideas over several documents. So sometimes I remember I had written down something, but I can't remember where exactly. You have the same problem sometimes, and you do have a tip on how to manage your ideas efficiently afterwards. So great question. For me, I personally, I like to work in Google Documents, and that's in a Google Word document, right, and a writing Word document, and I like to work in bullet points because I can tab in bullet points. And so, as you probably saw me last week, how I personally organize my thoughts and ideas is very systemically. So again, related back to last week's talk. So even if it's a creative idea, I like to categorize and organize things by ideas. And so that's why I typically will kind of put everything into that one document. And so I might write it on paper, if it's in the middle of the night, but then I'll usually go transcribe that back if it's an idea worth keeping, which, usually I try to keep every idea. I'll usually go then put that down into the area that that I'm currently working in. And so so then in that Word document, I might have, again, categories of creative ideas of things that I'm working on. And so to give you an example, it might be storylines, and so story might be like a high level thing, or the IP just in general, what the IP is, what the world and the universe is, which is a slightly different thing than the story. I want to make sure you guys don't confuse those two, because we will today be talking about IP or the brand, right, and the story, right? So an IP or a universe or a brand is that big, all-encompassing everything, right? And then within a brand or an IP or a universe, right, you could have multiple games, multiple types of games. You could have comic books, you could have toy lines, you could have movies, you can have any kinds of different products and experiences within a brand or a universe or an IP. So a particular story could be related to what my overall universe is, or a particular story could be related to that particular product that I'm currently struggling with or working on or designing, right? And so I want to make sure that you understand that some ideas are going to be very product specific, and then other ideas are really specific to, a brand or IP or world building, as we call it. And those are two different things. And for me, they're very, very important to differentiate, because I typically, especially in the beginning of an idea, I'm usually thinking about the brand and the IP and kind of the bigger picture of stuff, and then I'm usually myself trying to spend a little bit of extra time to think about how this particular idea fits into the bigger picture of what I'm trying to build overall. And so I like to spend those extra few minutes or hours sometimes, or occasionally days, to make sure that the ideas that I'm working on for that particular product fit into a bigger vision. And that's something that I differentiate when I'm brainstorming. And so just keep that in mind, that sometimes of understanding, like, what's my big picture, right? And then kind of what within that, what's in a universe, right? Like when I'm coming up with ideas, is it a particular product, which could be like a genre of game, like I'm trying to do a first-person shooter, in this universe. I'm trying to do a strategy game in this universe. I'm trying to do, a movie in this universe, right? And so those things have their own, areas and their own things that I'm often trying to do the ideation for, right? But there's also stuff that, again, maybe bigger picture or not even related. I mean, sometimes I just have like gameplay ideas that may or may not even relate to this game. So then I might have another subheading that might just be gameplay, and then under gameplay, I might have strategy games, first-person shooters, other things. And so in some of my general brainstorming stuff, I may just come up with a great idea for a first-person shooter, and that may or may not even fit exactly with what I'm working on today. But if it's a great idea, I try to record it, right? So by working in a Word document, by using bullet points and indentations and things like that, in the same way that I would systemically create the game systems for a particular game, I will also typically organize my own thoughts and processes within this whole space. Excuse me. So Noctrodema, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. So I use a technique I picked up from a science fiction novel. It says, no, really. I call it the Tomorrow File. And it's just a compendium of stuff I think I might be worth, some of my time in the future. Yeah, so the other thing you can do is often just, especially if you're doing things that are visual versus just words, right? So there's a lot of different ideas. There's lots of different types of ideas, right? So there's ideas that are inspired from many different sources, and there's ideas that aren't just thoughts and words, right? So let me show you an example of that. And this goes to Nocdemus's thing here, and that I also will keep folders full of stuff. So for example, like characters here, and and so I will go through, and let's just here, and so quite often when I'm Googling, if I come across an idea that I like, and that idea could be a picture, it could be a video, it could be other types of media that go beyond stories or whatever, I will typically save these into folders. And so I have literally tens of thousands. Like I have on my hard drive, I have a reference folder. And in that reference folder, I have images. And under images, I have them very roughly sorted by science fiction, fantasy, modern, all these different eras of things that I work in. And then underneath each of those, I have categories of like environments, characters, vehicles, miscellaneous, things like that. And so when I come across things that I like, I save them, right? And then I do a similar thing with like links to websites. So I have entire directory structures and folders, a little bit of my OCD side there of even when I come across a website that I don't want to lose, I have a place for ideas, right? That I'll save that web link, into my ideas folder, right? So that could be even just a link to a YouTube video or things like that. And I keep those. I don't go too crazy. Like you could easily spend way too much time, like doing that kind of stuff, right? And organizing it too much. But I like to throw things just into these, rough folders where now when I'm looking for a character, I'm looking for something, I can just come in here and so this brings me to one of my first points of where do my ideas come from? And me being an artist, and me being very visual, I get a lot of ideas through art. And, that art, art can come from many different things, right? That could be from movies, TV, concept art, other games, whatever it is. But just as I come across things, whether it's static images or video images, I like to save those, right? And stuff. And so, and then even all of my own games that I've worked on, a lot of different things. So there was like, characters, and now here's like, environments. And so, so again, and stuff. And now I have, lots of different environment art, right? And so again, and some of these can be live action. They can be still shots from a movie. These could be pictures I've taken while I'm on trips. So the source of these images and the thing at that time that inspired me, they can be completely random, unrelated, but I still save them because I never know where and when I might want to use them. And so by having them kind of roughly categorized, when I'm working on something that I thematically sort of know that I'm going down that particular path, then I can use these folders and use these things. And you can do exactly this same thing, even if you don't have a single image on your hard drive. I started this process, 20 years ago, before there was Google, right? And so I still have this massive reference library, but in all honesty, you can do 100% this exact same technique just Googling your ideas, right? And learning how to Google search and learning how to say, like, I want fantasy characters, right? Or I want fantasy environments. You actually can probably get 10x better results because you can hone in on those results. You can go, I want fantasy concept art, or I want dragons, or I want whatever, right? Versus I have folders of random junk that I've collected over the years. And again, I started this practice, before Googling and Google really existed, of never losing things. And so it's a process that I use now. But keep in mind, 100% the same process of how to get inspired from these things, can be used just using Google these days in image searches, video searches, or searches, of other types of reference material. So Eli, do you ever start at a theme and then figure out the systems or even the genre from that? Absolutely. So every game, and we'll get into this. I'm jumping ahead a little bit in the slides, but to answer kind of Eli's question, every new game idea comes usually from somewhere, right? Now, we sometimes are fortunate when we get like the ability to create a whole new idea from scratch. But in all honesty, I mean, the number of times that I have been able to 100% be able to start from scratch and say, like, I'm going to come up with a whole new game world, right? And I get to do anything in the whole world, in the whole universe that I want to do. And I can go science fiction or fantasy or modern day or whatever is currently inspiring me. Those moments in time as a game designer do occasionally exist. But I find that a significant amount of the time when I am trying to figure out what I want, I'm usually given some like thing, right? The executive team at the company I'm working for or something like that will give me some mandate, some directive to kind of say like, well, it may be a pre-existing IP universe. That could be from a book, from a movie, comics, another game, go do a sequel for this, whatever, right? So sometimes the theme is already chosen for you. If you have nothing, if you're starting completely and totally from scratch, you're lucky. But keep in mind, that's not something that a lot of game designers always get that luxury, right? We often are working professionals working for a game company, and we're quite often told what to do, or what we're going to work on next. So we're not always given that opportunity. However, that being said, if I'm given this opportunity to do anything I want, one of the things for me is doing market analysis. And we'll get into that, in a minute here, but again, I don't necessarily always. So part of my choices and part of my decision-making process can be what I like. It can be something because I get a random idea from a movie, from a game, from media, right? From somewhere else, or I get a random idea from the real world. I could be driving through town and see something stupid happen, and I'm like, oh, that would be a hilarious video game, like if that was made into a game kind of thing, right? Or you see a really sad story in history or the news, and you find a way to make that into a game. And that could be like a World War II game like Medal of Honor that's very hardcore and serious, or it could be even like if you guys have played a game called This War of Mine. I really love the game This War of Mine. It was predominantly, or started off as PC. They've now made a mobile version of it. But I liked the story context of This War of Mine. Besides the gameplay, I really like the gameplay as well. But I think they did a masterful job of taking the concept and kind of, I'll use the word horror of war, but the reality of that war is not a good thing, right? And This War of Mine does a great job at kind of bringing that across and really kind of making you realize that war is not a good thing, right? And that people, innocent people, civilians and people get hurt in war, right? And so they brought this theme across that, yes, it was historical, right? But I'm assuming that their inspirations, the team there is, if I remember right, is from Europe, and I believe from Poland or somewhere Eastern European. Forgive me if I don't remember exactly, but I believe they're from somewhere in that general area, Russia or Eastern Europe or something like that. And I'm sure that maybe not they themselves, but at least their grandparents and their society went through a lot in World War II that like I could never imagine, right? But that's maybe something they grew up with. And so they were able that was something that might have been culturally important to them, and they were able to bring that into a game as a theme, right? So themes don't have to be like science fiction or fantasy or things like that, right? A theme can really be a concept about many different types of things. You might want to be, doing something that's relevant, in today's world. It could be about, politics and corruption and, all these things in our media and stuff that's going on today. It could be, the theme of like social media and the impact it's having on our world, right? We see a lot of like even stuff that's like science fiction that's very dystopian, right? Where the theme really is about the corruption of like either corporate entities that take over the world or doing bad stuff to the world. I just recently rewatched a slightly older, not that old, TV series which I liked for some reason, called Jericho. Jericho, I believe, was originally on HBO. It's now come to Netflix. I rewatched it again over the weekend, and kind of in the background. And Jericho, without ruining it for you guys, sorry for him, is about basically this giant corporation that becomes very powerful and ultimately causes a nuclear war within the United States. And I can't remember, they take out 12 or 14 cities with nuclear bombs, and then ultimately reestablish a new government, which they ultimately control, right? And so this whole TV series, you don't really find out about that and realize that till you're pretty far, you get kind of hints at it and you get clues about it, but really it's like the setting, is semi-post-apocalyptic, but I like the fact that it's not taking place in the traditional post-apocalyptic setting, in that most post-apocalyptic worlds or games or whatever take place in the destroyed parts of a post-apocalyptic world. They, movies like I Am Legend or The Postman or things like that, they take place in a world that was destroyed through an apocalypse, through a world that's fairly heavily ravaged, often by nuclear war and destruction, or, people are dead and dying, and that's the world and the universe of where the story is taking place, right? And so whether that's taking place, or even a lot of zombie movies really are post-apocalyptic for all intents and purposes with zombies, right? But it's that same thing, like that's the story, and we're often placed in that worst of it, right? We're often placed in that context. And I think part of what I liked about Jericho was that the context and the setting of the post-apocalyptic world existed, but it didn't. It wasn't the traditional, typical post-apocalyptic world of, hey, everything's destroyed. You were getting news reports coming in, but you didn't really, like, you would see a mushroom cloud way off in the distance and stuff, but for the most part, they didn't really show a lot of destruction. They didn't show that stuff, right? So trying to separate out again the universe and the world from your story, right? And that doesn't mean that you couldn't do another game in that same universe that took place in one of those destroyed cities 100 years later, for example, or whatever that was, right? I mean, like, the universe can support a lot of things, right? But it's very different. And so those are the kinds of things that, like, where again, like, media can inspire us or give us ideas or show us something that's different that we can then take as our game idea, right? And use it. Mythology is another, strong one. I mean, and whether you are doing, an actual mythological game, meaning like using Greco-Roman type mythology or Chinese mythology or things like that. But again, whether you are directly using that stuff as is, and yes, you can do a game about Perseus, or you can do a game, using classical mythology, or you can use those as inspirations for your own mythologies, or, but there's lots of games, using now, where Greco-Roman was used a lot, we're also seeing, like I think the latest God of War was Norse mythology, and and at least in the Chinese culture, there's a lot of games that are based on the Chinese mythologies. And I know that when I was in India, we were working on a game that utilized ancient Indian mythologies. So there's a lot of ways to utilize mythology in video games, either directly or indirectly, as inspiration again, right? As ideas, and that could just be one little tiny thing, right? It could be a dragon, right? And that one dragon doesn't, just because I have a dragon in my game, or the Monkey King, or whoever it is, doesn't necessarily mean that my entire game and world and universe and everything has to be like D&D, Tolkien-esque, Lord of the Rings style, fantasy, right? Like maybe the dragon's the only thing in that universe that I'm creating that I took from something else, right? And so the idea is, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing, right? You can pick and choose things to use, but that can give you a place to start. And maybe in the end, your dragon isn't even a dragon anymore. Maybe it morphs into something else, but that can be that kernel of an idea that helps you start, and gives you a place, to start from, right? And it gives you a place of where to begin. And so then you can ask yourself, well, what is it about a dragon that I like? What is it about a dragon that inspires me? Is it that I like, a big giant, massive creature with wings? Like, is it the visuals of a dragon that are inspiring me right now? Like, what is it about the dragon that's making me interested, right? Like, what is it about that experience? What is it about the user experience, or what is it about that thing? Is it that the dragons are, hoard gold and and have these massive treasure things, or breathe fire, or have some other abilities, or this thing can not necessarily dragon, but something that can turn invisible, or whatever that thing is. But understanding what is it about that thing that inspires you, right? And understand what is it about that thing that you like. And then from there, you can brainstorm even more ideas, right? And you can get other things. Now, something to understand really quick, just as a side subject that I think's important to understand, is that quite often mythology and history can sometimes blend together in strange ways. And so just something to be aware of, in that, especially in China and Asia, a lot of mythology and a lot of history kind of tend to blend together in some blurry kind of ways that we don't always understand or take into account properly. And so just be aware of that, and that when we're thinking about and we're using these inspirations and we're using these things, we need to understand where they're coming from. And so you need to understand, first of all, what you're going to do with it, right? Are you trying to create a new IP with it? Are you having to work with an existing IP? And are you working with that IP exclusively? So if you start with an existing Star Wars, for example, do you have to work within that universe 100% and within the confines of that universe? Or is there ways that you can expand that's going to allow you to take it in new directions or do something new with it? And so you have to really kind of understand, especially when you're working, if it's not a new IP, but if it's an existing IP or something that's what I call reality, right? So that could be modern day, historical, something that's based on something that's real. You need to know what your boundaries are. Like, how far can you push these things? How far can you innovate or change things and stuff like that? Because, not everything makes a great game. Not everything can make the game that you want to make, right? Like, I've used this, I think, story example before but I'll use it again. I was working with a movie studio that wanted to make a movie out of wanted to make a game out of one of their top movies. And the director and the writer, they were the same person. So the director was also the writer of the movie, the creator of this new IP. Had created kind of this new action hero, and he had his favorite guns. And he uses these two pistols that are identical pistols, and these were like there was a whole storyline behind why he used these same two guns, and they wanted to make a game out of this movie idea, but they wouldn't allow me to add any more guns to the game because this main character only uses these two guns, and so ultimately in the end I walked away from the project because I realized that, I could not do a first-person shooter, which they wanted, out of this particular brand, out of this IP, out of this storyline, out of this character design and things, because it limited me too much, and they were unwilling to allow this character to use other, weapons and, and things like that, right? And so I ultimately couldn't make the game that I needed to make, that I knew would sell and be fun, because the IP was too restrictive. So Rushback. So how do you get ideas from competitive games? That's a tough topic. I mean, because I think as game developers, we often are good for better or for worse. I'm not, please don't take this as like a judgment, right? There is a lot of game designers and game developers who steal, borrow, or get inspired by other games, right? And that could be a gameplay mechanic, it could be a storyline, it could be a character, it could be absolutely anything, right? And so when we're playing something, or we're watching something, or we're reading something, or doing something, whatever it is in life, and games is just a more elaborate thing, because games being interactive and games being also what we're making, there's probably more there to get inspired by, right? We'll use the word inspired right now, and I'm not saying that it's good or that we don't, especially as an industry, tend to copy too much, and certain designers and companies are very guilty of that, of directly ripping people off, and we know, there's lots of guilty offenders out there. But that aside, if you're, wholeheartedly not just being told like, hey, go rip off this game, go copy this game or whatever, like anything in life, where these ideas come from are really initially like, what do we, and by we meaning myself, or my team, or whoever is in this current conversation about what are we trying to make, right? So again, this could be myself brainstorming. I could be brainstorming with friends. I could be brainstorming with my team. Whatever it is, I could be actively sitting down and just trying to like come up with random ideas, or I can be doing things and using stuff for inspiration. So obviously, like watching TV, watching movies, I may just get a random idea and like I'll see like a character do a really cool move, and and you're like, oh, like that was cool, like that inspired me, right? And so I'll see that same thing, right? And same thing in a competitive game, there may be just a mechanic that when you go and play it, like in Apex Legends, for example, their ping system, like I think their ping system was brilliant, right? And so that's like a system that would inspire me. And like when I'm playing that game, I wrote that down. I'm like, oh God, go back at some point and look at that ping system and be inspired by that. Not necessarily meaning rip it off or copy it or whatever. I'm not going to get into the gray areas today of like whether you're ripping something off, copying it directly, or whether you're being inspired by it and you're changing it and improving it, right? There's a lot of gray area in there. That's not about today's conversation, right or wrong, and however you approach that. I'm always a big believer in just trying to get inspired by stuff, right? But then also being able to look at, analyze things, break things down, and then hopefully make it better. But truly try to understand why is that thing better? Why is my idea, or why do I think my idea is better versus like what that developer did, right? Because sometimes changing things just to change it, just to make it different, doesn't make it better, right? And so there's a lot of gray area in there of how and why you can get ideas. But let's stop for a minute and let me show you when I'm brainstorming some of my tools and some of my techniques. So we looked at a few minutes ago art, and I get inspired a lot by art, right? And looking at art. But let me show you some other sources for just how I get ideas. Now you'll see, obviously behind me here, this is just a small fraction of my board games. And so I have hundreds and hundreds of board games. And so for me, from a systems mechanics perspective, board games are often huge inspirations for me. I get inspired by even games like chess or Go, right? Why is it that a game like chess or Go can be around for hundreds or thousands of years and still be fun, and it's still played, right? And still being sold. Even games like Monopoly have been around for like 50 years, right? So why is it that a lot of our video games, other than we obsolete ourselves every 2 to 5 years because of our stupid technology advancements? Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's great that we have new consoles coming out constantly, but it sucks that half the games I made in the beginning of my career, not only can I not find them anymore, I can't play them anymore, or I gotta dig up some old archaic Atari Jaguar console to try to play it on. I gotta figure out how to hook it up. Like, I can't even physically hook up those devices to my new TVs. Like, the connectors don't even work anymore, right? And so then it's like, okay, now do I need an old TV to play it on, or a converter? Like, it's just, the industry, moves very quickly, right? And so, there's something about board games and things like that inspire us, right? And yes, so D&D, being a big part of it, I'm going to get into that in just 1 second. So let me first start with some physical stuff that I have here besides my board games. But like, just to give you an example, like, this is a game called Dune. This is the original bookcase game version of this. And I don't remember exactly what year I got this in. It was in the 1980s. They just re-released this game, I think it was last year. I'm trying to remember if it was maybe a year ago. I got it for my sons for Christmas. They did a very great re-release on this game, and I don't remember who made it. If you guys are into board games and you never have played Dune, like, go pick it up. You definitely need like 5 or 6 players to really like make this thing great. But I think this is one of the best board games that's ever been made, and I like it because every side of the game that you play, each race and group plays totally differently. So this would be more akin to like StarCraft, right? Where every race is totally different than, say, if you're playing Age of Empires or something like that. But what I really like is that each race that they made is really, I can't say it's perfectly true too, but it's really accurate to the books and to the movies. And it's amazing how well and how balanced, because obviously Frank Herbert, who wrote the original Dune books, when he wrote them, video games I don't think even existed, right? So it wasn't like book series and then and then the creators even of this game. I don't even know. I'm not even sure if video games were even all that prevalent. This might have been even like Atari 2600 days when this original game came out, right? So even video games themselves weren't great. But the board game design of this thing, I played this 1,000 times and I still love playing it. And like I said, this version you can't really find anymore. But they just released it, and it's almost a perfect copy, and much better graphics, and obviously new and all that. So I know Amazon has it. But just saying, like, games like this have inspired me more than almost anything that's out there. And so don't forget that as a game designer, specifically, that the systems and the mechanics and the purity of board games can be massive. And in fact, I buy and play a lot of German board games And I buy ones that like aren't even in English, and because the Germans are probably the masters of strategic tactical board games, and they'll like, you know, even buy games where I have to go online and find like the English, like find the manual, you know, that somebody's translated somewhere into English, you know, and play it that way. But again, the pure strategy of some of those games is absolutely amazing. Now, let me show you guys some books. These are just a few. I'm going to show you some physical books. You know, I've transitioned now mostly to digital, so it kind of, I have mixed feelings on digital. It's nice that I can like carry 1,000 books on my iPad, but in the same hand, I still like the tactility of physical paper, so I always kind of have mixed feelings about this. But like what you don't see on camera, my reference bookshelf is thousands of books. And in my garage are hundreds of boxes of books, and I don't even know how many boxes of books I have in there that are like pen and paper RPGs like D&D. And I've transitioned and bought a lot of that now digitally, which I'm going to show you here in a second. But I think there is absolutely incredible reference for game designers in existing material, right? And so whenever you're stuck and I don't know if I'm atypical. When I design and when I work on a subject, when I work on a theme, I immerse myself pretty heavily, like in the 95% of what I do, what I read, what I watch, everything is often related to that game that I'm right now working on. So for example, when I was working on Age of Empires, I was doing lots and lots and lots and lots of historical research. So here's an example of, you know, sorry, I'm trying to get the reflection so it's not too bad here. Time chart of military history. You know, and I found this book, and it was the most amazing book with these huge charts that like open up really wide, you know, and detail out. Oops, sorry. Try to get this on camera there. You know, and detail out just all this historical stuff. And so this helped me tremendously in the research for Age of Empires. I've done some different game ideas on dinosaurs, and I've had quite a few different games that, you know, I've tried to do on dinosaurs, and you can see even all my little sticky notes here, you know, of all the stuff that I found, you know, throughout it. And so just again, like, you know, why reinvent the wheel? All these books and all these reference material exist, right? And so now if I know that I'm doing something on dinosaurs, like I can Google it, or I can go find great books, you know, that cover that subject, right? And then from here, you know, sorry, off with my camera. You know, this book is whatever, 500, 600, and about 500 pages. So, you know, here's 500 pages of amazing reference, amazing research, and brainstorming, right? If I'm doing a dinosaur game, like I don't have to read every page of this. I don't. Sometimes I'm just a little kid. I just like looking at pictures. You know, I don't read dense text. You know, that's just there, right? I will stop and read when I need to and when I need the inspiration. But I'm looking for, you know, those kinds of ideas. You know, like tanks. You know, looking at ideas. You know, for tanks, and I again especially love, you know, and appreciate books that have lots and lots of illustrations and pictures. None of us like to read, but a lot of these, whether you're reading or not, right? There's a lot of these books that have a lot of inspiration for us. You know, especially back before Google, you know, I got a lot of inspiration for level design and things looking at books on architecture. So I have, you know, lots and lots and lots of books on architecture, and books like this gave me ideas and brainstormed ideas for futuristic sci-fi type, you know, architecture. I've done a bunch of games, you know, around spies, you know, and so again, a book like this and one that's got lots of pictures, you know, the DK series especially is great, but but they cover like so many different subjects and so many different things, and I can't even tell you how many thousands of ideas I've gotten out of just stuff like this. And again, whether I'm doing a modern day spy game or whether I'm doing a fantasy or science fiction or whatever genre, again, right? There's different themes here that we're talking about, right? There's different places we're getting ideas from, right? And there's different types of ideas we're getting. Like this could be, for storyline, but this could also be for gameplay and game mechanics, right? This could be for the different weapons and devices and all those kinds of things, right? That like spies could use. So there's lots of things like that. Again, more books on like art and just like science fiction art. So again, especially back before Google, I bought lots and lots and lots of art books, all on like sci-fi, fantasy art and stuff like that. And I still pick up, if I find good art books, I still grab them because they're still worth their weight in gold to me for my inspiration. Likewise, I've worked on a few James Bond games, right? So this was not only a great reference for me to work on a particular IP and to understand that IP and to work on that IP, but what I really also liked is, again, back to spies, is there's a lot here that inspired my spy games, right? So I'm kind of double dipping here where this particular book I bought for a particular game to reference it, but in the same hand it had other bits and ideas and things that helped me not only understand the IP better, but actually gave me gameplay ideas, along with the movies, right? So even if you're doing a movie-based game, whether that's James Bond or, Star Wars, again, Star Wars Encyclopedia, massive, stuff. I used that like crazy when I was doing my Star Wars games, right? So these things can reference not only the existing IP, but again, can inspire you and can give you ideas of like what you're doing when you're working on, existing stuff. And again, more just like historical books. I've got, things on Roman warfare, legendary places. Again, stuff I used on like Age of Empires. So again, these are just examples of how existing things can help you come up with ideas. The architectural book here, grab, is called Architecture for the Future. And again, there's so Bunny Hatcher, I think that's the one you were talking about. And again, just has some great great references for, let me see if there's some, oops, sorry about that. Hard to see my webcam there. But just some good references for all types of different types of architecture and design and things that, at least for me, inspire me. So now let me pull up some digital books and kind of show you some other equivalents. Now, something that's, so Rushback, you talked about D&D. One of my favorites is called Gerps. And Gerps is a generic universal role-playing system. Now, this is not about, okay, so let me separate these out into two things right now, right? There is gameplay mechanics, and there is again, reference material, right? And so I'm not going to debate today whether, GURPS or D&D or any of the pen and paper, RPG systems, which there is a million of them. If any of those are good or bad, or if any of those have gameplay systems, if you're designing an RPG, can you be inspired from them? Can you learn from them? Can you, get good ideas from them? Absolutely. Like there's a million great RPG systems out there in the pen and paper world. And keep in mind that many of those have been around for 20, 30, 40 years, and they've been very heavily polished and perfected and gone through, lots of stuff. Now, obviously, you don't want to rip off D&D and just utilize that as is. It is its own system. It is copyrighted, and stuff, right? And same thing with GURPS. Like these are not So I am not, when I use these things, I am not trying to, I actually am not usually looking at the gameplay systems. I just want to be clear about that. What I really like about Gerps, and let me pull up really quick the website here. So Gerps is a system by Steve Jackson Games. It also has been around for 20 years or something like that, at least. It's another really, really big system with hundreds and hundreds of books. Let me see if I can go here to... And they're also like in their 4th edition, kind of similar to D&D. All right. So let me see if you guys can read this here. So what I like about Gerps is that, again, the core base mechanics can be of use to me as a game designer. And I'm not going to say that I haven't occasionally got inspired by that. I will say that usually it's more like I will look at something and get an idea, not based on their game mechanics, but based on like a device that they might have, for example, like an invisibility cloak. And you're like, oh, wait, that's a great idea. Like, why I should have an invisibility cloak, right? So I'm not looking at their specific mechanic and saying, well, that weapon does X number of hit points, and this is the way it does damage, and things like that, right? There's a difference there. I'm not looking at those there, but I'm getting inspiration often by their universes and their worlds. And what I like about Gerps is, like, for example, this is World War II. And so, in this particular let me see if I can zoom out here a little bit. In this particular book, this is 212 pages of information about World War II. And I don't want, I'm not trying to read it here, but there's a bunch of history here, right? There's a bunch of stuff that talks about, like, the armory. You guys can see this. So this talks about all the different weapons that were used in World War II. It talks about their vehicles. It breaks everything down in, like, all sorts of stuff. And so for me, that's the kind of stuff that is absolutely invaluable reference, because somebody went in the same way, some of these other books that I just showed you a minute ago will often break down a topic, and then they'll take that topic and they'll make a book out of it, and they'll say, like, here's all this information all compiled together in one place, right? And you've got now access to all these types of things. And what's even better about things like Gerps is that they've put it into the context and framework of a game. And so let me, and so whether those are, like, super useful for you or not, it gives you ideas about how to categorize things. So if you go back to, like, my talk last week about systemic game design, right? You might have categories of things, like, here's mortars, on the right-hand side. And you've got the machine guns, and stuff, there. And then here's, light anti-tank weapons, right? So each of these is a category, and whether you use these directly or not, it's an incredible reference, right? And so, here I've got hand grenades and mines and rifle grenades and flamethrowers, and then here's all the different vehicles again, right? And they've kind of broken things down into the different types of vehicles. Like, here's artillery, right? So again, these are ways for us to kind of go and go, like, oh, wait, here's a way for me to think about this thing as a systemic thing that, that I can use, right? Let me show you, like, another Gerps book. So here's, Gerps, magic. And so let me scroll down the table of contents here. And again, like, not all this stuff would be of relevance to you. But let me get rid of that. So, but again, it's a way for you to start thinking systemically, right? To start categorizing things, to brainstorm ideas. When you start to think about magic, in your game, right? Let's assume you're going to have magic in your game, right? And you want to use this as a brainstorming tool, within your game concept ideation process, right? You can see here that things like, the casters or time required, like, well, how much time does it take to cast magic? And even just that one thing here will make you go like, oh, yeah, you're right. Like, I need to, in my design document, like back to last week's topic of systemic game design, I might need to realize like I need to have, the time to cast, right? And then the energy cost, so what do we mean by energy? Is it mana? Or is magic something else, right? Like what is that thing that what is that cost? Again, that limiter, as I call it, right, to using magic. And so it makes you think about those things, right? It makes you kind of question that stuff. So even though this is in the context of a different game system, and hold on a sec, and it's in context of something different. It's something that's relevant to you, right? It's something that's that makes you think about things, right? And then you can think about like magic items, and you can go like, okay, well, is magic inherently only in my character, or is there items in the game that have magic, right? So this one tool, I'll call it, and the tool being this Gerps book, this one thing is now giving me a lot of ideas, right? A lot of stuff, both at a systemic level of like, are these gameplay systems that I need? And it gets me to ask questions about those things. But it also, could then be like inspired. Like I may not have been thinking about a whole, set of things, right? And stuff. And so it's just a way for me to, again, think about stuff and like, how do I do like enchantments or, earth type magic, food spells, gate spells, like for traveling, like rapid traveling and movement, right? Do I need that or not? I don't, when I'm first starting with an idea, I may not know. I may know that I want fantasy. I may know that I want, magic in my game, right? So this could be a place that I'm starting. So, if my initial inspiration is leading me down this path of magic, then like this particular Gerps book and other reference, whether that's watching Lord of the Rings or whatever it is, can be sources to inspire me, to make me think like, oh yeah, like how am I going to fast travel, right? So that's where these like, gate spells, would come in, or is that like opening doors, or whatever. What is a gate spell, right? Make me think about it. Like, what do you mean by gate spell? I never heard of a gate spell. I never thought of a gate spell or whatever. The same thing with like healing spells, right? Again, whether you use it or not, and even if you're only looking at the table of contents, it makes you think like, oh yeah, I need healing. Right? Or do I need healing? But generally in a game, you probably want some healing, and so then you think about like, well, am I doing healing spells or is it magic items? Are the magic items that heal me? Is it a caster that heals me and uses a healing spell? And it just starts making me ask all these questions, right? Which kind of goes back to last week's topic of systemic game design. But this is a way for me to get ideation, in a way for me to come up with ideas around particular topics, right? And stuff like that, so that's why I love Gerps. Like martial arts was a book I used a lot, like when I was doing the original Bruce Lee game on the Xbox, and there was Jeet Kune Do, which is the martial arts style that Bruce Lee himself used, but we needed to come up with like all of the bad guys in the game well, not all of them, but a lot of the bad guys in the game were all going to use different styles of martial arts. And so, I know some martial arts. I've studied a couple different styles. I've watched a lot of martial arts movies. So, I've got inspiration, from those. But I didn't really know what all these different things and styles and stuff were, right? And so, like, even just coming into this, this one book, and this one thing here, gave me the ability to again start understanding very quickly in 250 or so pages. I could very quickly reference a lot of different martial arts styles, things from different eras, and stuff like that, right? And then it also started making me think about from the perspective of, again, like from a game designer, like what are the things in that martial arts, right, that I need to kind of understand? What are the things, like when I'm doing combat and stuff, what would I need to use, right? So Gerps martial arts was something I used a lot, as an early reference. Same thing with vehicles. This was just, again, another one of those things where there's lots of ideas for like how do vehicles go together, systems within a vehicle, and did those inspire me? Now I specifically pulled this one up. As you guys probably know, even though unfortunately this game just got delayed, I think it's mid-December, the new Cyberpunk game. So as you're probably aware, there's a new game by CD Projekt that's probably arguably going to be one of the biggest games of the, I think even have potential to be one of the all-time greatest games as far as sales or popularity and stuff. It's hard to say how big this game is going to do, but I suspect it's going to do really, really well. It looks absolutely incredible, and everything I've seen about this one looks like it's going to be a blockbuster. But what you might not know is that Cyberpunk game that CD Projekt is about to release here in the next month or so was a pen and paper RPG designed by Mike Pondsmith, who's a friend of mine and an absolute amazing designer. He worked with me at Microsoft. He started as a pen and paper designer. He then went into video game design and then kind of went back into pen and paper design. And then this particular IP got licensed by CD Projekt, and now Mike is heavily involved in that project as well. And so this is a perfect example of where you can take an IP, an existing pen and paper game, and turn it into a video game, right? And I don't know exactly how true the RPG systems are going to be, and how true the universe is going to be, and things like that. I don't know how much of it's inspired versus like exactly the IP. But this is a fully licensed product that was turned into what's going to be an incredibly high budget. I don't know how much they spent, but it had to be a lot. And it's going to be, I think, going to be a really great game. I'm excited by it. This is probably one of the biggest games I've been excited by for many years, right? And so, but again, if you didn't know, this just didn't come out of the blue. This was not an RPG concept that CD Projekt just kind of randomly came up with. This actually was something that had history. I don't know how popular it was. Like, I don't know how many books it sold, or like, I don't know if it had thousands or millions or hundreds of millions of viewers and players over the years, because it's been around for a really long time. But either way, CD Projekt felt that this was a great IP to license. One of the things of what and why I also want you to kind of see this. So this is one book. Again, you can see 250 or so pages. This is the core standard rule set. So similar to like D&D, a lot of these universes they start with a core rule set. So this is the building block. This is the base of what the game is. It has some campaigns, it has some of the world, some of the universe, some of the features, right? But then the really big ones, Gerps is kind of an exception. That Gerps quite often has a lot of one-offs where it's a universal system that has, I would say 100 different IPs underneath it, where some of it's World War II to martial arts, but they also have some of their own original IP, and that original IP might have 5 or 10 books, but they're not necessarily like massive. Whereas like in D&D, if I don't know how many hundreds or maybe thousands of books there is in D&D. Some of those can be little small 20-page campaign books, and some of those can be 500-page big massive things, all the way to novels and everything else that they've inspired. Cyberpunk was kind of like that. I don't know how many books there is total in the series. I would guess there's 20 to 50 total books. Again, you can check I wanted to show you guys here the website, for it. So it's our Talsorian Games and Cyberpunk, and so this is the original kit, and so I think you can get the PDF version right now. I think it was saying that they're sold out, or they have been sold out of the actual like paper version of this. But yeah, see, Origins Game Award, Best Science Fiction RPG, 1989, right? So it's been around a while, right? And a really, really, really great system. But again, whether you are using this directly or indirectly, like I've been showing you, there is lots of things that this IP can inspire you from, right? So for instance, this Cyberpunk, this was the original Cyberpunk IP, meaning this idea of a post-apocalyptic future with like hackers, and all this kind of stuff. A tremendous amount of movies and books and other things, as far as I know, have been inspired by this IP, right? This IP that Mike Pondsmith created inspired a generation of different things, right? And so I want you to understand that, these things again can work as inspiration for you and work as ideas for you. You don't have to take the gameplay systems exactly. You don't have to take the ideas exactly, to make it work. So Rushback. Excuse me, my stomach's been bothering me today. Says, what game would you say had the most insane, incredible ideas, and what inspired those ideas? Honestly, kind of an impossible question. I think every game to me has had, has different types of ideas. I get different inspirations from every game. So in some games, I might look at gameplay features, and I'm looking at game systems, and and I may see a system that I really am inspired by in a particular game. In other games, it might be the story and the universe that I really love. Like Horizon Zero Dawn, I've been playing a lot of. The Witcher 3, I've been playing a lot of. Like both of those games have inspired me a lot. Now, whether I would ever use any of the features or the ideas from the IPs from those or not, I don't know. But in the same hand, if you look at the core gameplay from a game designer's perspective of both of those games, they're not incredibly innovative, right? They're again, what I would call that 70 or 80% kind of game, like I talked about last week, in that they have a lot of the same, they have a lot of core of like what we've already seen before, and then they just add on that little bit of extra something that makes it special. And then on top of that, you create an interesting universe and an interesting world, and then that's like icing on the cake, right? But as game designers, we have to realize that when we're brainstorming, when we're ideating, that we're looking at a lot of different things there. And so everything inspires us, for different reasons. Now next, as we start this process, we start this journey of creating these ideas, it's also important that you really know what your limits are. And, your limits can come from a lot of different things. And again, if it's your own new original idea, you might tell yourself at some levels, like, well, there is no limits, right? I can do whatever I want to do. And that might be partially true in the sense of the universe and all that. But every game or movie or whatever it is has limitations based on its technologies, its platforms, the budgets, the teams, all these kinds of things. Like even go back to Star Wars, right? Think about Star Wars was originally conceived by George Lucas as 9 episodes, right? So we've now been fortunate enough in our lifetime to, have now seen all 9 movies, and we have, seen all the spin-offs, and, and I know Disney's working on a billion other Star Wars things, right? But the core 9 movies have now been created. But as you all know, or should know, George Lucas started on episode 4, right? And he first did episodes 4, 5, and 6. And then, some number of years passed. And then he went back and did 1, 2, and 3. Now, one of the main reasons that he did that was that at that particular time, I believe it was 1975-ish when he began, or even in 73, 74 probably, when he, began those really initial early proof of concepts for the movie. We're not talking about in 77, I believe, when Star Wars came out, the episode 4, but talking about, it took him a couple years to film it. And he had some time where he was writing the scripts and he was, putting the models together, and he was doing test filming just to prove that he could even build that, right? And the scale of his ideas for episodes 1, 2, and 3 were massive. He envisioned having these massive battles, these massive armies, these massive fights at a scale that nobody had ever even imagined before, especially back in the early 70s. And so the reason he started with episode 4 was that at the time, he believed that he was capable, which he did, obviously, and he did a pretty amazing job, especially I think 5 and 6 got even, exponentially better. But he started with the movies that he knew that his particular technology, even in movies and filmmaking, i.e. model making and special effects, that he knew was currently capable of doing. And so he skipped his early ideas because he knew he couldn't pull it off from a technology standpoint, right? And it wasn't that he didn't have a great story. It wasn't that he didn't have a great universe. He had all of that kind of outlined and thought out and figured out, ahead of time. From what I understand and know, I think all 9 movies were at least outlined, initially, before he even started, the full script for episode 4, right? And so he kind of knew what his universe was. He knew where he wanted to go, but he focused in on what he knew he could achieve. And so games are no different. And so I think you'll find that, that quite often, again, we have to sort of know what our limits are. And quite often, our biggest limit is our budget. And I had the same talk this morning with some of my students, and they're kind of like, where do we start? And like, how do we know, especially when you're new, right? Like when you've never made a game before, or you're new in the industry, or you're new as a game designer, it's really, really, really hard because you might look at one particular game, like the Cyberpunk game, which we just talked about, right? I don't know what their budget is. I'm going to throw out a completely random number that's a best guess, but I could be off by a lot. But I would guess that they probably are spending, $50 million, to make that game. But, plus or minus whatever it is. But just using that as a reference, like, so you may have an incredible idea, but if that idea is going to cost you $50 million and you're at home by yourself alone and trying to figure out how to get this game idea made, and you've never made a game before, starting with an idea that's a $50 million idea probably is not very realistic, right? Now, if you are, a game designer or a lead designer or a creative director at Ubisoft or EA or whatever, and you've shipped a couple big games, you've had a couple big hits, then can you go pitch, to the executives like, hey guys, like I got this $50 million idea. What do you think? Right? So that could be possible, or that can be feasible, right? But in the end, budget's everything, right? And so whether you are an indie, and you're trying to do a game for, $50,000, or whether you are a AAA dev doing a game for $50 million, right? If your initial concept doesn't take that into account, then all of this brainstorming, all of this work, everything you're doing could be for nothing, right? And it doesn't mean that building a great universe isn't important. And I'm not saying that even if you're an indie that has no budget that you shouldn't create a great universe, but know your limits and know and understand that at some point in some time you're going to have to create a product within that universe that's going to be, feasible and something that you can pull off, and achieve, right? And so that's something that you need to sort of understand there. And so knowing your limits, and knowing kind of what's achievable, even in your technology. I mean, even though our technology is 1,000 years more advanced, than it was even 10 years ago. I mean, it's amazing the difference between if you look at UE1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and now jumping to 5, and even just seeing where PS4 to PS5 is going. Like it's still, even for me being in the industry for almost 30 years, I'm still constantly amazed by how fast our technology keeps progressing, right? And so while our technology is progressing exponentially quickly, there's still game ideas that I have that are never, and at least right now, even by PS5 and UE5 standards, are not achievable, right? And some of those are not achievable because of the budgets and the amount of cost it would take to make that idea. And some of them just are ideas that are like still a little too crazy. Like to do a character that's got 100 arms and, and has full articulation and really crazy, stuff like, or super advanced AI or whatever it is. Like that stuff is getting better every year. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I can achieve it, right? And so that's something where you still have to be very aware of that. All right, Rushback, thanks for joining us, and looking forward to seeing you next week. Have a good night. So, if you're starting with an IP, we've kind of talked about this already, but you really have to know what that IP or what that universe or what that genre is about. And I don't care, even if you're doing fantasy, right? So it doesn't mean that you have to do Lord of the Rings. It doesn't mean that you have to do D&D. But if you're doing, say, fantasy, you want to know what are the different types of fantasies, right? What makes fantasy? What makes D&D versus Lord of the Rings versus some other variant, different. Fantasy is a little bit more standardized, right? It has a little bit more, like, we know what elves are generally, usually. We know what dragons are generally or usually, right? And that's one of the reasons why fantasy is so popular with a lot of people, is it's more familiar. Now, in science fiction, because there's no real standards for science fiction, I mean, we have a few, but as an industry, and I mean the entertainment industry, and we're talking from books to movies to games, not just games, there are certain conventions within science fiction that are sort of standard, I'll call them. But there's a lot that we just have no idea what anything is in science fiction, right? And so there's a lot of things that we can get ideas from out there, whether we're looking at aliens or whether we're looking at, Halo, or whether we're looking at, whatever it is, right? There's lots of like super crazy sci-fi out there, or there's lots of like near future, just slightly sci-fi out there, right? And everything in between. A lot of sci-fi, crosses over into fantasy or even kind of blends them together, right? That whole Isaac Asimov quote of, any technology that's indiscernible, becomes, magical, right? And so there is a point where, we as human beings might see something as magical, when it actually is a form of technology, right? And so those are all gray areas, but my point is knowing what's done or knowing what's out there is something that can be really helpful to you and really, important to you and knowing that reference material that's out there, whether it's directly your IP or not, for me is really important. So if I'm going to go do something that's fantasy, I will go, again, immerse myself in a tremendous amount. Now, there's so much fantasy out there. There is no way that I could read and watch and whatever, every single, fantasy movie, book, TV, comic, game. I can't watch it all, right? But, in certain IPs, you definitely want to kind of know, like, what's my, I want to say competition, but what is my inspiration, and what are the IPs that are out there that are similar, right? That are that can, that you can get ideas from, but also you have to be careful because, again, people get these ideas about, what they expect, right? And so if you're doing, say, fantasy, and you put a dragon in your game, and let's just say that you're doing general, like, Tolkien-esque fantasy and stuff that's very traditional, in the fantasy world. And so let's say you're doing that, right? Now, if your whole world and your whole universe is very traditional fantasy, and then suddenly you throw a dragon in there, and that dragon, is totally different, right? And doesn't follow any of the rules of any fantasy IP that's out there. It's not to say that you can't do that, but you really have to introduce it carefully. It becomes now more like science fiction, where something, just isn't, it's not understandable. And so it can throw players off and really mess them up and even upset them if you change the rules of what they perceive, is the real world, or they perceive what that IP is going to be like, right? So any kind of, alternate history can fall into the same thing. If you've got it, so if you don't make it really, really, really clear, or at some point make it really clear. Now, maybe there's a mystery behind it, and maybe you don't want them to know that you're in a alternate universe or alternate history, say. Maybe it's a world where, World War II happens and Hitler never dies, and Germany ultimately takes over the world. And, we've seen some TV shows and movies and things like that have had those types of concepts, right? There's nothing new or totally original about that. But if the player doesn't understand the rules of that universe, and you portray it as like realistic modern day, and then suddenly, something really, you're emphasizing that, making sure they understand that, making sure they get that, right? Because you just changed the universe. You just changed the rules. You just changed what they were comfortable with, and that can make a lot of players uncomfortable, right? And so you do need to sort of be aware of that, right? And so another thing around that's actually sort of funny, and I'll warn you guys, if you're working in any universe, and I use the word universe broadly, so in any IP, and I'm talking even historical stuff, I have gotten in trouble many, many, many times doing historical games, right, where I was following what I call it, all right, the right word would be real history, right? So I am literally picking up, the like, I don't know, Roman warfare, right? And in my mind, this is real history. This is like, I'm in school, and this book has the truth, right? So for me, like, this is real history, right? This is, if I was in college or university, like, this is what the truth would sort of be. Now, there's two things that you have to be aware of, and this is and it's kind of sad and kind of funny, but there's also what I would call Hollywood truth. Now, Hollywood truth is this thing where in many Hollywood movies, the movies will often change the storylines. Take movies like Braveheart, for example, with Mel Gibson. Those things are inspired by real history, and they are close to real history, but they actually have differences. They actually change certain characters. They change certain plot elements. They change some stuff to make it more interesting. They change certain things to fit their story goals so that their movie is more entertaining, or in some cases they're trying to make a political statement. Whatever it is, they Hollywoodize that real history. And what's funny is I've actually gotten like heavy complaints from fans where I'll do a historical game and then I'll get all this like hate mail from people and all this bashing online, and they're like, oh, those guys were idiots. Like, they didn't know what they were talking about. And, you know, in the movie Braveheart, this guy did this. And then in your game, you did this. And like, you know, and you obviously like were idiots and didn't, you know, do the research or something like that, right? And they literally call you out on your ignorance and complain about that thing. But in reality, I was actually the one that was following the real history, and the Hollywood or the other game or whatever it was actually the one to change the real history. But because that was popular, because that's what people saw, a lot of people learn their history and a lot of their stuff through movies and even non-fictional books or fictional books, you know, that are slightly not perfectly real. Right? And so the authors are changing things, and they're just like we're doing with a lot of our games. They're trying to find their way through this thing to make it feel historical. Sometimes they may not know the truth, and so they are changing truths or filling in blanks, you know, in hopes of some of that. And because in some cases we don't know. An example of this is I was doing a sequel to the movie 300. Now, as you guys know, the movie 300 is inspired by real events. That is supposedly, or we think, or know, is the Battle of Thermopylae was a real battle. But the movie 300 was very, 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 very fictionalized, right? That was not historically accurate at all. Now, in real life, the Persians do retreat, and Greece is saved for some time, and the Greeks, ultimately, and the Persians ultimately do get back into some wars again. But in real history, there's about 80 years, and this is partially because it's so long ago. There's like 80 years where we actually don't know what happened in those 80 years. We don't know the real history. There's no books, there's no records, there's nothing there. And so I was told to do a sequel to a historical movie, which basically everybody dies except for Delios. And if you don't know, Delios, who is the star of the movie 300, was actually based. He is a fictional character, and even his name is derived from one of my friends, Flint Dilley, who's one of the best writers in Hollywood and games. He works on both movies and games. He wrote TV series like the Transformers and a bunch G.I. Joe and other stuff. I mean, the guy is absolutely a legend, and he helped co-write the 300 movie. And the main character, who's the storyteller in that game, is actually, his name was even derived from Flint's last name. So anyway, so like everything in that is slightly made up, but it's historically based, right? And here I had to do a sequel, which originally was going to be taking place after that. But again, like I didn't have real history to go from. And so like I'm having to make a lot of things up, but I'm trying to like come up with stuff that feels inspiring and feels, that it was going to, be there and things, right? So it wasn't historical, but when people watch like the movie 300, they assume that was real, right? That was real history and stuff, and they don't always understand that wasn't truly real, right? So you have to be a little careful sometimes when you're dealing with that. And one thing to be a little bit careful of as well is that when you're a game designer and you ship a game to multiple countries, and especially if you're doing a historical game, and I'll call out Asia in general. I'm not going to call out which countries, which has been multiple. I've actually had this problem in 3 countries in Asia, and that when when I had a game that was a historical game based in that country, and I used what I would call, again, real history from American textbooks. Now, again, not going to argue who's right or wrong here, but just letting you know, like, I got banned in several countries. My game got banned in several countries, and I was forced to change the historical facts of that game to fit the textbooks and what that government, now says is the real history of that government. And so certain countries have kind of rewritten their history books either totally or slightly to either make their current governments favorable or for various reasons. And so again, if you don't know these things, if you don't know how to culturalize or globalize your product, you sometimes have to be very careful with that because, again, some of these countries can get very sensitive about their history and very sensitive about not only their history, but even their rivals' history. And so I've even had trouble where I had a particular game where I had one Asian country in it, but not the other Asian country. And to this day, those countries are not the best of friends, and they're not enemies, but they're not, best of friends. Let's put it that way. It's not like they're at war with each other, but this was a game that I was trying to ship in both countries. And in this particular case, this particular game only had one of those two countries represented in it, and that other country that my game was not that my game did not represent banned me because they were pissed off that I represented their rival country and I didn't have them in the game. And so we had to do some reworking and mix some things around so that because that country was important to us. So we shipped a different version of the game for that country, that took out that other rival country to make them happy. But again, these are things where, again, the history and the IP and the brand and the things that inspired us in using truths sometimes, as well as these other things, can mess with us, right? So you need to know, like, what can be used, what can be changed, and what can be adapted, and what are you allowed to mess with, right? Just like my story with the movie with the guns, like I couldn't change things, so ultimately I had to cancel the project because it wasn't something that I was willing to work with. We've talked about collective reference a lot. Sorry, we've kind of jumped around today's talk and it's been a little bit random. So hopefully this is still helping everybody. But again, there's a lot of different sources for how you find things, where you find things, and I think we've covered all this already. Again, I've talked about understanding a subject fully, and again, that reality versus perception, right? And so we've talked a lot about and I know people again that have made historical-ish games or fantasy games or whatever, and and they've never played like D&D, or they've never played a major point of reference that they should have, or at least in my opinion that I would have in order to understand that IP fully. So understanding the subject is not a requirement, but definitely is something that is useful, helpful, and again, I think is good for you to do. And so, again, you need to understand, like, why is ideation important? Why is getting these good ideas there? And like, how do you break through, like, when you're stuck? And why is it so hard? And I think a lot of this is just that we get flooded with too much information. And so back again to last week's conversation, in systemic game design, I think ideation has that same problem. And that when we try to look at the totality of an idea and we look at the totality of a game, we get lost and confused because we try to look at all of it at once versus narrowing down. This is where the mind mapping techniques can help, or the systemic ideas that I gave you last week can help. But focusing your ideas into one particular area and one particular thing at a time can sometimes help you. So you might look at the technology levels. You might look at the magic systems. You might look at, some characters. You might look at the politics. You might look at, whatever it is about that universe that makes it interesting. You might look at the gameplay, like what's going to make this game fun, and why is it unique? Why is it special? That can be anything. That the unique and special question is everything from the storylines all the way, through the the gameplay mechanics. And are you making a simulation or are you making a fun game, right? And so your ideas may come from one kind of game. They may be relevant or they may not, right? And so you need to understand, like, what is that something that works? But in the end, like I talked about in the very beginning, to try to kind of bring this full circle, what is it about that idea that inspires you? Why did you or somebody like it, right? So even if you're going to go off and say read a review of another game, like, why does a particular reviewer like that particular game? What is he praising about it? What is he liking about it? What does he think is fun about it? Do they like the character designs? Or what, right? So what is it, that's there that they are liking, and then take that, and build from it. And then how do you build on your ideas? How do you take kind of that initial idea again, like, okay, I want magic. Now, how do I build on magic? And how do I keep, making it bigger and bigger and bigger? And so again, back to last week's systemic design, that's one way and one approach. Or go look at your Gerps books, right? And go, and go see that's there. I had a couple other books I also wanted to show you, like as far as techniques, since we're running out of time here. For example, I've done several games that were military, and I've had several games that were again, like survival and things like that. So this is like actually U.S. government, actual like military survival manuals. This is from 1992. But again, like, this is a 650-page almost book, that's written by the government, that talks about just all aspects of, survival. And so if you're going to do a survival game, again, books like this exist. And so whether these things are written by the government or whether these things are written by an author or whatever, but when I'm trying to come up with an idea and I'm working on a particular subject, there's lots of reference material out there that can help me, break these things down. And so, again, like, looking at, weapon systems and all these different things, a lot of these will break down. There's tons and tons and tons of reference material out there. And whether those are books or manuals or websites or whatever those things are that break down a lot of stuff. And then if you get stuck, like, okay, because even if you're not making something that's modern day, let's say you're doing something that's science fiction, you could still go read a book like this and get ideas and be like, oh, wait, missiles. Oh, wait, lasers. Oh, wait, radar information detection systems, right? Oh, wait, chemical biological weapons. Like, it doesn't have to be a one-for-one correlation. The ideas that you might see in this particular thing that you're reading can inspire you, in a lot of different ways. Now, this may or may not, this particular book, for example, may or may not be something that helps you in a fantasy game, right? So you need to know kind of like, is this material at all inspiring or relevant to what you're doing? But again, don't be afraid of looking outside your genre, right? You don't have to go just read, sci-fi to get ideas for sci-fi, right? Modern day stuff, and even some of our real world stuff, if you really know what's out there, it's kind of scary. Like there's a lot of stuff that even our current U.S. government is using and doing that, is pretty science fiction, and science fiction-y. So that's, stuff. And then there's, other topics like, again, you may not know, you may be doing a game of America versus China, right? And like, do you know what, the Chinese stuff is like, right? So you may need to go do the research again. And in doing that research, it's going to inspire you and you're going to come up with new ideas, right? But again, there's lots and lots and lots of reference material about all these subjects. And the final thing I wanted to show you is that there is a lot of there is a lot of, I guess for this, there's a lot of research material out there that you can Google, that you can find. Some of these you need to buy. Some of these are research reports that, are done. That, this one's a little bit older, but I wanted to use it as an example. Well, they'll talk about particular games. They'll talk about platforms. They'll break down, what is, a particular game, like what goes into it, right? They'll talk about, the different, types of things that are in a game. They'll talk about, like this is talking about fads, how are these things going? So when I'm in my very early ideation process, I'm also looking at stuff like this because, for example, you can see here like music and rhythm games in 2009, they peaked. By 2013, they were pretty bad. 2014, it started to grow a little bit. But if you looked at over the next 6 years, like I did a game called Bandfuse. Now, Bandfuse was a different one because it was an educational game. But Bandfuse, did have, it was inspired by a lot of the rock band and, things, but you could hook up a real instrument to this, and it actually taught you, how to play it. If you guys haven't seen it, go check it out. It was really a great game. Now, it was in this genre, right? But it was different because it was educational. So it had its own niche. But if we had just tried to do another plastic guitar game, could we prove that there was a space, that there was a need, for that, right? And so that's the way I often will look at my initial ideation processes does the market have a need for this? Is there a want for this? Is there a hole in the market for this particular thing? Like Battle Royale games right now, like I wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't like Battle Royale games. I look at Fortnite, PUBG, and all the other 900-pound gorillas in the room that are all these, big, massive juggernauts. And you might say like, well, hey, there's 500 billion people in the world. I think pretty much everybody now in the world has officially played Fortnite. I think it's definitely huge. From what I understand, I remember seeing numbers are starting to decline a little bit. But there's these 900-pound gorillas that control the industry, right? And I know for a fact from talking to friends that there is a lot of Battle Royale games still in production. And over the last 5 years since PUBG came out, was really the one that, even though it wasn't the originator, I think H1Z1 was kind of one of the first really big ones, even though it wasn't the first. It was the first to kind of get big and get noticed, and then PUBG was a spinoff of that, and Fortnite was kind of a spinoff of that, and so on and so forth. But now that industry is so dominated, right, that how can you go against PUBG or Fortnite, right? So while doing a Battle Royale game may be the coolest thing ever to you, you've got to recognize where there's market opportunity, right? And stuff. And so your ideas also need to be filtered. This comes back to what can I do, but also is the what should I do, right? And so opportunity, maybe there's a 900-pound gorilla out there that's science fiction, for example, right? So you might identify and say that game's very dominant, it's really good. World of Warcraft, for example, still a very dominant MMORPG, but it's fantasy, right? So you could argue well, maybe there's room for a sci-fi MMORPG because there's one dominant player, but that one dominant player is in a particular genre, and so therefore there could be an opportunity for science fiction players who like MMORPGs. So studies like this can kind of help you identify stuff like that. But again, games like Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic, I believe, whatever, they had their MMORPG. There's been a million sci-fi MMORPGs. Some of them have done okay, but to my knowledge, none of them have done great. And WoW has still just destroyed them all, and stuff. And so you do have to kind of be realistic about it. Doesn't mean you don't do it, but you got to be realistic about, is there an opportunity for that idea in the market, right? And where are these things? Because our industry is very trend driven, right? We're getting all these things and stuff. And so, sorry, I'm going through this fast because it doesn't really matter, but understanding who your audience is, understanding all these things, understanding if that's something they're going to like, is this something that the players you're targeting and who you're going after are interested in? Is this a subject they're interested in? Is this a topic? Is this something that they're gonna, a genre of game that they're gonna like? Is this like even RTSs right now, like the RTS genre, the Age of Empires, Command and Conquer, like that genre kind of died and now it's starting to come back again. Everything's cyclic. We see a lot of cycles in our industry, right? You have to really know, like, is this a cycle I'm gonna jump back on, again, right? And so that's something that you need to sort of understand. And so that's where these research reports and getting data to help back up your ideas is another way for you to look at, at your ideas, right? Also, just looking at articles. I get a lot of inspiration just looking at blogs, different articles online, different opinions of different people, whether those are professional, websites like IGN or GameSpot or whatever, to whatever it is, or there's different just sites out there, even, GDC and different conferences and different websites related to these things all have information around either game design, game development, or a particular genre of game, particular type of game, all those kinds of things that can help, again, inspire me. Even seeing some of these things can help save you time and effort, because you might get inspired and go like, oh wait, they already tried that idea. Like, they like a lot of the GDC dev talks I love, because they'll talk about the process they went through to get from start to finish. And sometimes when you see what they went through and you see the struggles, and you'll say like, oh, I had a better idea, they should have done that, and they're stupid because they didn't. And then you'll go watch a GDC talk and they did that and it failed, and then they pulled it out and they went a different direction because they realized, that they had a similar idea, but actually in proof of concept and implementation and through focus testing, that turned out that idea was bad, right? So just keep in mind there's lots of other places, again, that can inspire you for ideas. I look heavily at game reviews, whether those are written or video, or whatever form of game reviews. I like to see what the press is going to say. I like to understand what the press is thinking. They are the most jaded of all. But I also like to look at, what do the consumers think, and what is Reddit and, other sites like that. What are people thinking, and what are those hardcore? Because even if they're the one percenters, right? And they're that vocal minority, they can still be, can make or break, your game. Look at your competition. Understand them, and really, 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 really understand your competition. And if you don't have any competition, you better understand why you don't, right? Because I've seen a lot of people make the mistakes of like, oh, I'm doing something completely new and original. Like there's nothing like it. That's a huge red flag to me, right? So be careful about that as well. And when you're brainstorming, again, this comes back to the very beginning. Rush back if you ever watch this again or whatever. Talking about mind mapping, capturing ideas. Again, we mentioned this in the very beginning because of Rush back, but this is, again, no idea is a bad idea, right? So make sure that you're brainstorming in the right ways. Make sure you're innovating for the right reasons versus or are you iterating, right? And should you come up with a whole new idea? Could you refine the idea, fix the idea? Like, what should you be doing there? That's really important for you to understand. And then, like, how to approach it. Do you have the best creative ideas? Are you trying to make more money? Are you trying to have a highly rated game? Are you following industry trends? Are you trying to like make something great for that platform? Are you copying a successful game? Like, what and why and how are you going about your game design, right? That's going to really be something that inspires you. Again, copying versus original, like right or wrong, I don't know, but there's a lot of, again, pros and cons about being inspired by something versus copying it, right? And we talked a little bit about this. I'm not going to go into it today, but you kind of get the idea. Again, genres and conventions, really understand what your genre is, and if you're going to change a convention within your genre, make sure you know why, and make sure you're really getting it. Sorry, we're out of time, so I'm just rushing through these last couple slides. Make sure you validate your ideas with your team, focus testing them, and stuff like that. That's really important. And again, can you do it? Make sure that that this idea is going to be fun. Make sure you can execute on it, because you can have the best idea in the world, but if you can't actually make it, it's pointless. You don't want to constrain yourself too much, but you also don't want to have something that's that $100 million idea that you got $5 to make, right? So be a little bit careful there. And then, make sure that you also build and test your ideas. and all that. So anyway, sorry everybody, I went a little faster at the very end. I hope this session, it's rambled a little bit. I apologize, but get your next game idea and give you at least some sources for when you get stuck and you're trying to get that idea and you're trying to put that game together. Again, watch last week's talk on systemic game design and this week, and if you kind of put those two ideas together, maybe that'll help you figure out what's next, right? So anyways, everybody, thanks again for watching. Have a great week and be safe, and I hope everybody went out and voted today. So take care, and we'll see you all next week.